Okay, a very good afternoon to everyone. Today we have gathered on the Zoom platform to uh, mm, to host the meeting of CATOG, and the topic of our session will be legal drafting. The session will be presided by Advocate Nushad Ahmed Khan sir. He is uh, he is an expert in the petition and drafting skills. So firstly, I'll explain to you what is CATOG. CATOG is a registered LLP under Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and the name CATOG is basically a collaboration of Kacheri and Together We Can We Will. Both organizations are working in the field of law since 2016. For more information, you may visit catogcourses.com. After the session, we will also introduce you to our courses. So kindly be with us after the session. Now, coming to Mr. Nushad Ahmed Khan, sir. Sir has completed his LLB in the year 1998 and LLM from Indian Law Institute in the year 2010. His area of specialization includes intellectual property rights, copyrights, patents, trademarks, cyber laws, corporate matters, service laws, rates, tenders, national and international arbitration, etc. Presently, Sir is serving as Additional Standing Counsel, Government of NCT of Delhi. Apart from this, Sir is also the president of Indian Young Lawyer Association, which was started by him in the year 2003. Indian Young Lawyer Association has been the petitioner in landmark cases like Muzaffarnagar riots case, Sabrimala case, and various other landmark cases. Sir is also member of various organizations and government committees, which includes Institute of Constitutional and Parliamentary Studies Committee, International Law Association Committee, Amnesty International Organization, International Human Rights Society, and others. I think the day will fall short if we continue to mention about Sir's achievements. So without wasting any more time, let's start the session. Over to you, sir.
Uh, Good evening, everyone. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
All right. As the topic suggested to me, that is legal drafting. As a practicing counsel, my endeavor would be to focus on the drafting skills in respect of the pleadings being filed before the court and the ancillary documents. It's a very wide subject, very vast subject. It requires special skills, which is being learned by us from day to day, from our own mistakes and experiences, thorough reading. So basically, we have to focus especially on those things what we really wanted to draft. Generally speaking, for the lawyers in the beginning, the kind of work they receive is drafting of the notices. That is the beginning of the career of a lawyer in general. And that is the smallest document a lawyer is supposed to draft. I'm focusing first on notice. Once you wanted to give, once you have decided to give legal notice, what you really wanted to achieve out of it, that is the main core area. Supposingly, you wanted to give a legal notice in respect of dishonor of a check. What are essentials in that? Let me focus on that.
So just a sec, sir, sorry to interrupt you. We are getting messages like they are not able to hear you. Can you please be a little louder, sir?
All right, I
And
will try.
try to increase the volume of your device, please, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So insofar as legal notice is concerned, first of all, you have to understand the context in which the notice is being given. Primarily, you need to go through all the documents like the check, the returning memo, the information given by the bank, the documents which have been executed between the parties or amongst the parties, individual entity or the corporate entity, corporate and the individual entity. All these are specific things which you need to first of all study. Then you have to see to it, after going through that, whether you really have a case or a substance in that. Once you study thoroughly and you are very specific in that, then you have to start drafting a legal notice. For that, what you need? First of all, identity of the sender is quite relevant. Who is sending the notice? Is it through a lawyer or individually or by a company? Because the sender of the legal notice is having a sanctity of that, because that is being challenged before the court of law, whether the notice has been sent by a appropriate authority. Then, if you are representing some client, then the client's identity for whom you are sending the notice. And once you decided that for whom you are sending the notice, that is your client, then you decide to whom you are sending the notice. For whom and to whom. These are two aspects. Then the particulars of the other side, respondent, from whom you are expecting a response, that has to be categorically made out. My practical experience when sending a notice is that in case of corporates, the chief executive officer or the managing directors or the working directors, when you feel that there is an element that there is a role in so far as issuance of notice check is concerned, then ultimately you need to make them as a party that we call in our terms as noticee. So you have to array them as respondents, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. And lastly, in that sequence, you have to make the corporate entity or a private firm or an individual entity, whatever it is, as a party. Then you have to be very specific in what context you are sending the notice. You must be having a agreement, whether it is a written agreement or an oral agreement, and what circumstances prevailed because of which there is a dishonor of the check. You have to see the liability, whether it is a legally recoverable liability. You have to make the particulars of the facts that you have received. The facts have to be narrated out of the documents which you have received, and you have received the instructions from the client. So as a lawyer, you have to listen to your client carefully, but simultaneously you have to look into the documents, because ultimately you have to rely on the documents. And you are not supposed to traverse beyond the documents. If something is there which is oral in nature and nothing contrary is being revealed in the documents, then those oral submissions can be considered. While sending notice, you have to be quite positive. The approach of a lawyer or the sender of the notice has to be in an affirmative manner. It should not be dictatorial. The nature of the notice should not reveal that this is authoritative in the sense that you are threatening or you wanted to extract something. Because while sending a notice, you have some checks that the purpose for which you are sending it, that is required to be achieved, rather than to involve your client in multiple litigations. Because the tenor of sometimes the context in which you are sending and the message you are revealing or conveying to the other side, that may be offending, that may be contemptuous, that should not be done. So while preparing your draft, you have to be very specific. Your language should be quite clear. and to avoid maximum the terminology which is alien to the other side. My concern is that the language has to be quite lucid, plain, so that it can be understood by a prudent man, an ordinary man. The language of the notice should not be like, it's a language which cannot be ordinarily understood, because the message which you are conveying is to the party from whom you are expecting relief. It may go to the court of law, where the judge has to understand its own perspective. You have to put it to the witnesses. Witnesses to understand it its own perspective. So the language has to be very, very clear, straightforward, and without having any complications, inviting secondary or tertiary meanings. The language has to convey state a single meaning. While sending notice, you have to be very specific insofar as under what provisions you wanted to send it. Because ultimate relief would be that once you are approaching a court of law, then ultimately there will be reliance before the court of law, and court has to examine the sanctity and veracity. For a lawyer, he has to mention his particulars correctly, like his name, his mobile number, his enrollment number, because the establishment of the identity is a must. Let me make clear that in certain circumstances, in the general course in my career, I have seen that a lawyer or the origin notice is emanating from a lawyer's office or from private parties. In the envelope, nothing is being said except a blank paper, and that is being produced, that the notice has already been sent, and then ultimately there is no content. This kind of practice has to be avoided by a lawyer, because ultimately it is the content which you wanted to say, in fact, convey to the other side, that amounts to like a faith or a trust which is bestowed on you, and also professional conduct also. This is insofar as professional misconduct is being made out in case the content is not being revealed and a blank paper is sent. So the lawyer's duty is to gather the factual matrix, to reproduce in terms of a legal document or drafting, and to portray the correct picture. Because once you are making a case, you are making a case on the basis of the facts available with you rather than misleading. Generally speaking, I have seen from my own experience, once a document is doubted, then the relief cannot be given. So better to focus on the duty on which you have been assigned for, and to be truthful to that. Because lawyer's duty is not to misread the document. Lawyer's duty is to place the facts correctly, because on the basis of which you will be asking for or seeking relief from the court of law. These are certain tenets insofar as drafting a legal notice is concerned. Now we come to the draftings, particularly the pleadings, like I'm specifically focusing on writ petitions being filed before Delhi High Court or the High Courts or the Supreme Court. High Court and Supreme Court is having extraordinary jurisdiction. High Court is having extraordinary jurisdiction insofar as writs are concerned. Supreme Court is also having jurisdiction under Article 32 as its original jurisdiction. Under 226, we can file petitions before High Court as writ petitions. So while drafting a writ petition, what you really wanted to gather out of that? Number one, whether you have a case of a writ petition, whether it falls within the jurisdiction of a court, which provision is involved, what is the violation of a statute, whether it is whether there is a violation of the fundamental right or any other right under which comes within the purview of the constitutional rights or the fundamental duties. So first of all, as I said, in case of notices, in case of other pleadings also, you have to read entire material which is provided by your client. While generally people what the people do, they just take the material and then draft it and then file it directly. As a counsel, as a arguing counsel, as a drafting counsel, I would suggest you that you must have interface with your client. That can be any medium, like you can have video conferences or you have direct interface. Once you have interface with your client, then lots of things will come out which is not essentially there in the papers. Those will come out when you ask them multifarious questions, and those questions are relevant while drafting the petition. Because everything cannot be disclosed or that cannot be transpired in the documents. That has to come out from the query. Like if you are filing a petition of a mandamus, writ of mandamus, what you need to check, whether there is a violation of any statutory right or violation of a statute, whether any authority has failed to address your grievance, or the authority is in collision with the private party, whether it is a violation of your right, which is constitutionally guaranteed, or a right which is emanating out of a constitution or a statute, or any rules or any legislations or subordinate legislations. If there is a violation, then as a lawyer, first of all, you have to scrutinize it, that there is a violation. That will lead to drafting of a petition. Once you establish or satisfy yourself, yes, it is a case which is made out, then how you have to start with the draftings. First, gathering of the entire material, thorough reading, and thereafter having interface with the client. If you are not having interface, then primarily prepare a draft, and later on you can have interface so that the draft is actual and correct, factually correct. Second aspect is you have to make the forum before which you are for which we are preparing the draft. The forum has to be correctly mentioned, whether that forum is in jurisdiction. Jurisdiction has to be checked. The correct particulars. Generally, I have seen from my own experience that either the address of the petitioner is incorrect or the respondent is incorrect. So in most of the petitions, my first-hand experience is that the respondents against whom you are asking the relief, that is not correctly mentioned. And once the particular person or the respondent is not there before the court against whom you are seeking the relief, your entire exercise is in futility. You'll not get any relief. Why I'm saying so? Supposingly you are asking for an urgent relief for which you wanted to have directions for interim stay or urgent directions which are required to be complied with forthwith, and the party is not there before the court, that has not been arrayed. Once the petition listed, honorable court will say, all right, the party is not there before the court, you make them a party and come back. When you will come back, it will be like next day or another subsequent day. Then ultimately you are remediless because the petition has become infructuous. So while preparing your particulars, you have to be very specific that whether you have mentioned the particulars of the party against whom you are seeking relief very correctly, and you have to doubly check it. In large number of cases, and I can say in majority of cases, this is the common mistake which is being done by the councils. Another aspect of it is the correct particular in the sense whether Supposingly you are making a ministry as a party, the address is not correct. Once the address is not correct, then to whom the notices or the summons or the order will be dispatched? Nowadays, we have an option of sending email or through SMS. If you don't have correct email or correct mobile number, then it will go to the wrong person. Then the other side will be having a defense. I have not been properly communicated, or the parties have not been correctly made. Even if there are interstate departments, they will take a plea. Sorry, we have not been bad as a party. Relief cannot be sought against us. There is no direction against us. Direction is against somebody else. So we are not under obligation to get this order comply with, and there will be no contempt. So because of a very small mistake, which is in effect within your domain, which a lawyer is supposed to check it, it is not the client, it is you who has to examine it. What are the parties? Because party is coming before you with the facts, and you have to determine against whom you have to seek the relief. Then the next paragraph comes in. You have to check to whom you are addressing. It has to be correctly addressed. Next thing is, while drafting a petition, check the draft 2 times, 3 times, whether there are spelling mistakes. Because if your draft is not absolutely clear, free from your errors, grammatically it is not correct, the honorable judges will get irritated. And after reading 1 or 2 paragraphs, what they will cull out of that? I have seen from my own experience that even in some of the petitions, I have not, like even one paragraph is not correct. Even not a single paragraph is correct. What court will ask for? Then honorable court was compelled to ask from the petitioner or from the lawyer, you tell us what really the case is. Then he has to explain orally instead of going to the pleadings. So, to my understanding, if you wanted to make out a very good case, then for that you have to prepare a very good synopsis. Say whatever you wanted to convey to the honorable court in 1 or 2 paragraphs, straightway, so that's a basic, that's the whole case before the honorable court, because honorable court may not be having too much of time to read it. But if your brief synopsis is quite crispy, quite clear, that is having the small factual matrix, the violations, the statutory violations, the provisions involved, and if you have some judgments in hand, the contents of the just a basic reference to the judgment, not a detailed narrations, then honorable court will understand, yes, this is the case. So from 1 or 2 paragraphs they'll understand instead of going through the whole chronology. Then the other thing comes is, that is the lucid language. You must have very clear language, flawless. Next stage comes in is the chronology, that the sequence of events which you wanted to portray before the honorable court is that the very first paragraph and the sequence up to the prayer, everything has to be in cohesion. If you make out your chronology, just like the list of dates and events, why the courts ask for preparation of the list of dates and events? Because the chronology of the all incidents or the events will come into like 1 or 2 pages or 3 pages, and that chronology has to be incorporated in the writ petitions or the petition. Once that chronology is elucidated, and that is clinching, one paragraph is dependent on the subsequent paragraph, and so on and so forth. That way you have to bind it, then it will make interesting. Yes, this has happened in the first paragraph, what happened next, the next. That way you'll make out a case. And ultimately, once you finish your factual matrix, you have to analyze it, that what are the grounds of your case, what are the on the basis of which you are making a base of your petition. Because the court will be examining your facts with the grounds. What are your grounds on the basis of which you are making a case? Then once you have made out your grounds, and those grounds are quite clear, that has to be substantiated on the basis of a rationale. because the grounds has to have the rational nexus with your facts. Then ultimately, though, once that nexus is achieved, then you have to narrate the law involved in that case. Like, supposingly, it's a violation of your right or a fundamental right, whatever it is, or a violation of statute, you have to specifically mention that the authority has not taken care of your representations, has not taken care of your rights, has not addressed your grievance at the appropriate time. You were having short of time because, and for that there will be a violation of fundamental right. You are approaching them directly. So you have to be very specific insofar as the grounds on the basis of which your factual matrix is being connected. Then the next stage comes in, that is the relief sought. So the relief which you are seeking is basically the grievance of the petitioner or an aggrieved party. So at the very first stage, when you are having interface or discussion with the client, you have to understand what you wanted to achieve or what he wanted to get out of the petition. Like, you have, because his basic grievance, you have to place before the honorable court those things or that prayer which satisfy, or which is in fact for that purpose the petitioner or an aggrieved party has come before the court. I have seen from my experience in legal perspective as a practicing lawyer, that the factual matrix is correct, question of law is correct, grounds are correct, the relief which is required to be sought is not there at all. Supposingly, there is an order passed by an authority, by one of the authority. Subsequently, another order has been passed by the second authority. And those two orders are having a consequence, which is your relief. Normally, the mistake which is committed by a lawyer is, or a draftsman is, that they will omit those representations or those orders passed by the authority. So if those orders are not quashed or set aside or not revealed or not asked for issuing a particular writ, then those orders will sustain. And the third relief, which is basic relief, cannot be guaranteed until unless those two particulars or such orders are not being set aside or quashed. So you have to focus on the basic document for which you are before the court. Whether you wanted to get that order set aside, you want to get that order affirmed, you want to get the order quashed, you want to get the order implemented, you have to see to it that whether a particular document which is before the court, you wanted to impress upon the court, or you wanted to have a relief, that is basically you have challenged before the court of law. If that document is not basically placed in, then ultimately you will not get any relief. Insofar as other aspects, that is connecting with the chronology. Connecting with the chronology in the sense that the documents which you are having in hand, on the basis of which you have drawn a list of dates, or the chronology in the paragraphs connecting one para with the other para, you must be having documents. In general practice, I have seen the private parties or the drafting counsel omit certain documents, either because of ignorance or deliberately. Supposingly, you have filed a number of documents while drafting a petition, annexing those documents as annexures, and omitted a piece of paper which is relevant. And you think that if I disclose this piece of paper, this particular document or annexure, then if the honorable court's attention is there, then the petition will be dismissed. And from my own experience, I have seen at least like in 20% cases, 30% cases, such documents are being omitted. But frankly speaking, I'll tell you that in such cases, when the other side will come before the court, they will be having the very first defense that there is a concealment of the material fact before the court. Because without going through the intricacies of the petition, without arguing a matter at length, on the face of the record, it will be transparent that the petitioner has concealed a basic document which is relevant to the controversy. Once that particular document is being pointed out, then the court will become suspicious on you. So then what case you will be having before the court of law? Court will understand that yes, you are not appearing before the court with clean hands. That is the term which is being, generally, frankly speaking, being used before the court of law, that the petitioner has not come before the court with clean hands. This kind of statements come up in suits, plaints. You will find this kind of petitions, revisions, writ petitions, every kind of, like any document you just point it. That is the very first thing, that you have the petitioner has not come up, or the agreed complainant has not come up with the clean hands. So that malicious intention should not be reflected in the pleadings, because that is your basic document on the basis of which you are relying. So I would suggest you that while drafting a petition, be truthful, absolutely truthful. Once you are truthful, you disclose a particular document, that this is the chronology, you have to justify it. Because justification is one of the aspects of a particular document. Like that document is against you, other parties in the possession of that document, which is having a basic defense against you. But at the very first stage, to demolish the defense of the other side, you have to disclose it fairly and justify your grounds that I'm placing this document on record. This document has been sent by the other side, or this is my document, and this document is having bearing in my favor because of these circumstances. Once you disclose that, sometimes I'll tell you from my experience that if you disclose fairly everything, then because of your fairness, honorable court grants you relief that is based on equity and good conscience. That proposition is being utilized by the honorable court when you are truthful to the court. Otherwise, such proposition you cannot utilize. Then it comes to the ancillary applications. While drafting a petition, normally this is a practice of different courts, that some courts want that the interim relief to be pleaded in the main writ petition or main petition, rather than filing supplementary applications or additional applications. Some courts are having this kind of practice that you have to make independent application for relief. So this is the second check I'm telling you, that while preparing the pleadings, generally asking for an interim relief or urgent relief from the honorable court, that kind of application is not being moved. And while making that application, you have to do nothing much. You have to cull out certain portion from the writ petition or the petitions, because the chronology you are having in hand, by synopsis you are having in hand, you have to copy paste your synopsis. And then ultimately you have to make out a case why urgent relief is being sought and to be granted by the court. Once you place forth before the court, at the very first stage, say that I am asking for urgent relief, I'm pressing my interim application, court will ask you, all right, where is your application? So I'm telling you, in number of cases, you'll see, if there are 50 cases on board, in 5-7 cases you'll find, I'm sorry, your lordship, I'll forget to mention the application. I have not filed that. So you have got a very good case and there is no application, you won't get relief. So your whole exercise, whatever you have done, that is waste. And that exercise is required to be done by an expert. And who is that expert? A lawyer who is skilled. So if a lawyer is committing this kind of mistake, that he is not filing an application, that is part of the pleading. If that application is not there, then ultimately the court will be constrained not to grant you any relief, because that is the technical requirement of the court as per the court's procedure, as per the High Court rules. And if that is missing, you can't get the relief. As I told you earlier, like other documents in the cases of petitions also, while mentioning the chronology, your language not to be only plain, but at the same time, it should not be offending. Sometimes people say that, all right, once I write a language, harsh language against the other side, and that too abusive or unparliamentary, or somewhere you are challenging an order passed by a subordinate court or high court, challenging before honorable Supreme Court, or challenging inter se, like inter se appeals, etc. When it is going from one hand, like I mean, from one authority or one court to the other court, higher court, and you are making some offending statement against the court, then ultimately, instead of focusing on your own case on merits, first of all, you have to fight about your own case, that the pleadings which is you have pleaded, whether that is factually correct, because you are offending a judge, making aspersion against a judge. So normally speaking, as a lawyer, and to the lawyers, I will tell you that don't get yourself involved insofar as making aspersions or such kind of statements which hurts a judge, which is not having a bearing on the facts of the case. Supposingly it is true that something is there which you really need to mention because of the conduct of a judge, and for that reason you have not got the relief, that is because of some extraneous considerations and anything else, then ultimately that is a different situation. But in general, when you don't have a case where you are not supposed to make aspersion or any remark against the judge, and you have to purely contest a case on merits, then you have to use a plain language which should not be offending to the judge at all. Judge has to concentrate, judge has to see. He has to see what is the merits of your case, whether it is sustainable as per the law, whether you are not got relief as per the mandate of law, whether the facts have not been properly appreciated by the court, whether the court has exceeded its jurisdictions. All these factors are court supposed to examine. So I would suggest you that instead of focusing, get the focus of a judge on a particular line or a paragraph which is offending, get the attention of the honorable court on your file. Again, I will say, your very first paragraph, which is synopsis, see, in every kind of petition, you have to cull out the material paragraph which is substantive in nature, which is having a base of your whole case. That has to be quite crispy. So how you will make it out? Once you have drawn your entire case, like chronology of the events, drafting of the petition, then finally prepare a synopsis, short synopsis, and that will be having entire bearing on your case. So in these, I will suggest you that to be clear what you wanted to have out of the pleadings, out of the factual matrix which has been provided by your client, or the instructions which have been provided by the clients. You should not have any ambiguity in writing. While you write anything, then it should not convey dual meaning or multiple meanings. Whatever you wanted to convey, first of all, you have to convey to yourself. Then your client will read. You have to convey it to your client. Then you have to convey it to the judge or the authority to whom you are sending it. Then it has to come to the other side, like an authority or the opposite side or the other party, which has to understood. So understanding has not to be different from you. What you wanted to convey out of your heart and which has come placed on record, that has to be specifically conveyed to the other side. So your message has to be very plain, which is having a single meaning. It should not have a dual meaning. You should not leave any scope of interpretation. Otherwise you will fail. If it is having a dual meaning, one meaning is in your favor, other meaning is in favor of the other side, then other side will take benefit of that. Third thing is you have to be quite precise. Don't repeat. You should not have a repetition. I have seen that A petition which can be drafted in 4 pages or 5 pages or 6 pages is being drawn in 50 pages. So same thing which is being repeated time and again, it will irritate the judge. And if you are addressing it to any authority for addressing of your grievances, then ultimately the correct meaning you wanted to convey to them, they will not get it. So while drafting pleadings, you have to be very precise. You have to be very precise. Apart from it, there has to be absolute clarity in the sequence. Once you make a sequence, which I already pointed out, that the sequence of the chronology of the events has to be absolutely accurate. It is something like a chain. Once you prepare a chain, then one link is being linked to the other link. If one particular link is missing, then ultimately it will not form. You will fail. So the chain of the events or sequence of event must have clarity and it must be clinching. Other thing is you have to define very important things. Supposingly a particular statute is involved. Instead of having a dependency on the judge that he has to look into the statute or a document, the constitution or an act or regulation or bylaws, on the basis of which you are preparing your case, better it, if it is having a substantial bearing, narrate it in the pleadings so that it is handy to the judge. Judge will understand it correctly. If if that pleading goes before the quasi-judicial authority or an authority which has to take a decision, or to the other side also, make them convey that this is the provision involved in that, then they will be having a correct understanding of that. And once they are having correct understanding, then ultimately half your battle is won. Then it is adaptability. This aspect is also quite important. Adaptability is the factual position, which I told you that you have to be accurate. The factual position which you mentioning, that must be established. Once a factual position you have mentioned in the pleading, it is not contradictory in itself, then ultimately it will lead to some conclusions. And if your factual matrix is not dependent, one para is not dependent on another paragraph and it is in contradiction, and it is not sustaining on the facts, then ultimately you won't get the relief. So the criteria is not, in fact, like it's not a hard and fast rule for the pleading. It is basically your understanding and consciousness, your prudence and your experience, how you do it. Because we generally learn from our past experiences, our mistakes, having interface with the clients, while appearing before the court, committing mistakes over there, learning from the actions of the other side. While arguing the matter, if sometimes we commit mistakes, and because of the pleadings, we fail before the court. Those are the things we need to understand. Once we understand that we have committed some mistake, then in future we have to rectify it. So normally speaking, I'll tell you, half of the battle is won once your pleadings are correct. And it is on correct facts and circumstances. Once you conceal it, then ultimately your 50% of the chances of losing of the case is there. So there are two sides of it. Making the correct position and not making the correct position. If you are portraying a correct picture, half of the battle is won. And if you are misleading, half of the battle is already lost. So you have to understand it. So generally, I'll tell you that lawyers generally are being approached by the private parties or the parties or the clients because you have a specific knowledge. You will be committing less mistakes. No doubt anybody can make mistakes. Lawyers can also make mistakes, but you will be, because of being expert, you have studied it, you have done your expertise, you have good experience, you'll be committing less mistakes. That's why other side should not take benefit of your more mistakes. And if you are committing less mistakes and putting things clearly, then ultimately a client normally will not, you know, he will, client will definitely get relief once the mistakes are not there. It is free from mistakes. So lawyers are being approached because of this reason, that they will commit less mistakes or no mistakes, because of which you can get the relief. And you have to be very transparent and fair to your client. I'll tell you why I'm saying so. Always tell the pros and cons of filing of a petition to your client. It should not be like, for the sake of filing a petition, don't take brief. I will not suggest at all. You have to be, first of all, you are true to your heart. A lawyer has to be true to the heart that, yes, I wanted to file this case, and to my understanding and to my consciousness, my conscience allows that this petition to be filed, I'll get the relief, then go ahead. Otherwise, I'll tell you from my good experience, if you feel that a particular case is not going to sustain on merits, and it is not appropriate to file before the court of law, advising your client that, sorry, your petition is not maintainable, you can relief, I didn't get a relief in future. The kind of relief you can get from the court is this: if you proceed like this, and if you are going in a wrong direction, ultimately you may face the consequences. I'll tell you few such instances. Like a petitioner filed a case before the court, concealing that he's having a past history. He has filed multiple petitions, and those petitions have been dismissed earlier, imposing heavy cost on the petitioner because of his malafidness, or no, other than malafide, he was extortionist or doing some misdeeds. So court getting offended because of the kind of petitions he has filed, vexatious petitions have filed, and he has not disclosed that chronology, came before the court. And the other side taking advantage of this, that this petitioner has not disclosed the facts in entirety, the previous orders which were passed against him, or the orders which were very relevant, then the court will ask whether any kind of such petition you have filed earlier, or any cost has been imposed because of your conduct, or such because of your extortions, or any FIR or any case against laws against you, because he has not disclosed the facts, the court may become suspicious. Then the court will ask other side, you disclose us whether any material you are having against him. But certainly I'll tell you, the other side will come out with that material only which is operating against him, rather than contesting the matter on merits. So why I'm giving this major emphasis is in the pleadings, that whatever adversity is there against you, you disclose it first, that yes, such petitions were dismissed because of these reasons. I have a good case in my hand on merits other than this. This is not having bearing on this, and kindly grant me relief. Then the court will be much happy with that. The other side will not come out with the defenses. Because I have seen that instead of discussing the merit of a particular case, merit is not being examined. Rather, the conduct of the party is being examined first. Once the conduct is being examined, then ultimately a good case which is on merits will not sustain at all. As a standing counsel, additional standing counsel for the government, I have seen that in many cases where gross injustice will be there with the litigant, petitioner, and because of the conduct of the lawyer, he has not placed the entire material on record, because client is unaware. Client may be unaware because client trusts you. You have not disclosed particular thing. And court says, all right, this is concealment of material fact. You have not come up before the court fairly. And the party will just look at the lawyer. Sir, मैंने तो आपको बताया था. I told you. I have placed everything to you. I have disclosed each and everything, sir. You have not done it. And the court will be compelled to pass order against the petitioner. Then, as a council, on the basis of, morality, on the basis of rights and ethics, we just ask the court that this is not the fault of the petitioner. We failed to disclose this. This is not the fault of the petitioner. Something, if it is amiss, then please grant the opportunity to rectify the mistake. Because sometimes we also feel that a party has come up before the court and party is not at fault. There is a gross injustice which has happened to him because of the inaction of the certain officer. We represent the government. I am telling you, as a government council, we represent the government. We are responsible to the government. We are responsible for defending the policy of the government. But because of the arbitrariness of a specific officer, it is a duty. It is our duty that the parties should not suffer. We have to help the court. We have to come out. We have to come out with the truth before the court. Sometimes courts ask us that, yes, tell us what is the truth. Once court trusts us that they ask assistance from the other side, from the council, from the government councils, that in that eventuality you have to disclose it fairly. Yes, they have a case. Because, and we concede sometimes, like we say, all right, we will rectify one mistake. Rectification of a mistake, which is on our own part, that is not bad. That helps the citizens. So basically the purpose for going before the court, approaching the court, is to grant justice, to get justice. It is not simply technically defending. We are not supposed to be a technical lawyer. Rather, we have to act humanly. There may be commercial litigations where commercial interests are involved. The kind of litigation involved, kind of expertise, a kind of temperament. But once you defend against a state, then your strategy has to be different. If it is a monetary interest of the state, or like it is an involvement of the estate of land of the state, then you have to be very strict. You have to put lots of checks on that. Simultaneously, this is one part of the pleading insofar as filing petition is concerned. I am coming to the response now. Mr. Ishan, how much the time?
Sir, it's 5. You may wind up in 5 to 10 minutes.
All right. So I'm coming to the reply now. While preparing a reply, which is part of the pleading, you have to answer specifically the issues which have been raised by the complainant or the petitioner or the applicant. You have to respond specifically on each and every aspect. If you do not respond to it, then ultimately that amounts to admission. Simultaneously, apart from filing your own reply to the submission of the petitioner, don't get trapped that whatever petitioner said, I have negated, I have answered. Rather, you make out your case that other than the reply, these are my other facts and circumstances or the issues or the narrations or the facts on the basis of which I am pleading that petitioner is not having a case. Or you are having some additional material which you wanted to place, which is not there in the petition. So in the reply, you have to be quite specific in denial. Apart from in denial, you make your own submissions. And in the submissions, generally speaking, make very first paragraph or the first paragraph, making your first additional submissions. And then thereafter you start defending para-wise. Apart from it, then it comes to like, sir, this happens in suits, civil suits. This happens in OMPs, or original miscellaneous petitions, original petitions. This happens in writ petitions. And this happens in arbitration petitions. Every kind of petition. There is a practice of filing of a rejoinder. If new thing has been said by the one side, which has filed the petition or application, you have to file the rejoinder. Until unless you defend whatever additional has been said, so while defending the petition, supposing one party is has filed a petition, certain facts are there, you are filing a reply. In that reply, you have uploaded lots of new thing. So there is a newness in that. Then ultimately your petitioner has to come again. All right. He has a right to defend himself that the new facts which have been pleaded, that need to be defended properly with facts and circumstances and documents and everything. Once you again defend yourself, firstly you are filing a petition, again you are filing a rejoinder or a replication. That way you wrap up the petition. And frankly speaking, always try to substantiate your affirmations, your submissions, your facts with the material, with the papers. I'm telling you one new thing. You have to make your document crystal clear also. Like while drafting a petition, you are annexing some documents, annexures, wherever some translation is required, make accurate translation. Don't forge anything. Make absolutely clear and transparent and lucid translation. Secondly, pleadings have to be crystal clear. It must be having lucidity. Like you will see some people, they don't bother about the paraphrasing. There are margins in the petitions, like gaps in the petitions. So, using of the paper, using of the ink, everything that matters. If your paper typographical errors are there, your paper is not clear, your paper is not purportedly it is not readable, then ultimately what court will look into that aspect. Until unless there is a transparency, then things has to come up. Like you have to have like piece of paper which you wanted to place before the court. It must be absolutely readable. It must attract your pleadings. Once you have pleadings which is flawless, which is error-free, which is lucid, which is straightforward, which is free for ambiguity, which is having a plain meaning, which is crystal clear, having a chronology, whatever you have asked, your thought process is quite clear, matching with your thought process with the pleadings, and simultaneously whatever you wanted to convey, that is being conveyed, specifically, whatever is there in your mind, that has to stick to the mind of the judge or the authority. That way, it is a sort of like it's a kind of brain mapping. You are there in your brain. You are putting on a piece of paper, and that is being understood by the other side. So interface, like through the paper, you are having interface with the authority or a judge. So by way of pleading, you wanted to convey a message. And once that message is being conveyed, your half of the battle is won. Once you are not able to convey the message properly, then ultimately you are a loser. So I just rest my my submissions on this aspect. There is much more, a lot about this. I have just focused on two simple aspects of drafting, that what you need to do, what you need not to do while preparing your pleadings. I just focus on a little aspect of notice and the petition or the petitions. It needs thorough deliberation on this aspect. I just rest my submissions here. Any question which is specific in nature, just respond to that.
Thanks a lot, sir. It was really an informative session from you. Guys, if there are any questions, you may ask your questions through live chat.
I'm just trying to focus on some questions. Any specific question? Just
there's one question asked by Vaibhav Srivastav. I'll just tell you the question.
Okay.
The question is, do we have to personally inquire about the truthfulness of the documents provided by the client that are to be filed along with the petition, if there is any doubt related to documents?
Yes, of course. See, you cannot trust every document. I'll tell you how it comes. Supposingly, a document has been provided to you and you feel that this is suspicious and that is available in the public domain, you can always check it. But as a caveat, you always get signature of the party on that piece of paper so that it is authenticated. Otherwise, it's very easy to put onus on the lawyer that I have provided the correct document and it is the lawyer which he have, he has not placed the correct picture. So sometimes you have to see the genuineness of the document, and for that you have to grill your client. Yeah, actually, the law of the lawyer is not something like whatever has been provided by the, your client, that has to state be placed before the court. Everything cannot be placed. You have to see whether this document is a genuine document or not a genuine document. Sometimes, like general inquiry is required. Like supposingly, I'll tell you one very glaring example. Seriously speaking, and that is clinching. In one of the sale deed that was before debt recovery tribunal, a scanned copy was placed before the court, and putting that scanned copy, documents were exhibited on the basis of that document. So lawyer has to see whether this document is literally it's a scanned copy or a original document, because once a lawyer is placing a document before the court, and that too he's checking, and court is trusting you, that is it's the original document which you are having in hand on the basis of which you are exhibiting, right? Then ultimately that document is in fact a scanned copy of the original document, and the original document is missing, then who will be at fault? I'm telling you, certainly it is the lawyer who has produced it before the court, it is the client which has produced the court. Both are responsible for that. So general inquiries are necessary insofar as while putting the court document which is inviting the genuineness of it. Yes, next question.
Yes, sir. I think that's appropriately answered the next question as well, which was whether the advocate or lawyer will be held liable if documents are forged by the client. So I guess this was also answered by you in the previous question only.
See, for a forged document which you know within your knowledge, and you can be out of or just as a prudent man, you see it that I cannot determine it the genuineness, non-genuineness. Then ultimately it is the client which is responsible for that. But I'm telling you a specific case where a party has in fact provided a scanned copy, and the lawyer has produced it like this as a original document. Then there's a distinction. Then in these two circumstances, there is a big difference. Ordinary prudence says that the lawyer has produced the document which is not original as the original document. Lawyer is responsible simultaneously. But a document which is forged and you don't know, then ultimately lawyer is not responsible for that. Lawyer has to plead that document. Then it's for that the litigant will be responsible. Anything else?
Yes, sir. Last question. If there are any question, please just everyone please write your questions. Hurry up. So we will take up the last question, sir. So how many times can we? Yes, sir.
Soumya has raised one question. Soumya Ranjan Nayak.
Okay.
Suppose I was working in the revenue department and I'm just reading the question, and I was dismissed from the service without giving a reasonable opportunity of hearing. So what shall I provide to the lawyer for the document? See, in case the principle of natural justice has not been followed, and the document you are not having any hand, like your attendance sheet or anything you don't having, then sending a legal notice is enough that you have not been dismissed from the services, or from, because see, any dismissal or suspension or any other action cannot be invited until unless there is a piece of document. And if you see that you have not been allowed and you have been told orally that you have been dismissed, then you have a case. You can always write to the authority first that please provide me the dismissal letter. If they are not providing you, still they are not entertaining, you have a remedy available before the court of law. You file petition, you will succeed in that. Yes, tell me.
Yes, sir.
Ishan, yeah.
Yes, sir. That's all, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. I think the questions will not end, and there are other questions also being asked. So we'll limit ourselves to 3 questions only. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for joining us. It was a really informative session, and thanks a lot for sparing out time for our organization from your busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir.
I am extremely thankful to the organization, TALK, and Mr. Ishan Garg especially, and he has in fact convinced me to have deliberation on the topic. I hope this topic is going to help everyone. And if you have any other query, then with the help of Ishan, you can raise those issues. I will definitely come out with the answers to my ability, whatever. Thank you very much. Thank you for having patience to hear me on this
Thank,
occasion. Thank you very much.
thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. It was a pleasure having you with us. You may leave the
Same.
meeting, sir, now.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Okay, guys. Now we have a small discussion for our organizations. As I told you that we will be briefing you about. Devesh, you now may stop the recording.